It was tea time, before the lamps were brought in. The villa looked down on the sea. The sundown had left the sky all rosy and golden, and the Mediterranean, without a wrinkle on its surface, without a tremor, smooth and still shimmering as the day departed, seemed like a huge sheet of polished metal. In the distance, away to the right, the jagged peaks of the mountains stood out black against the faint purple of the western sky. They were talking about love, that old subject, and they were saying things that had already been said very often. The gentle melancholy of the twilight brought a feeling of tenderness into the discussion, and this word, love, which was constantly being uttered, now in the deep voice of a man, now in the higher tones of a woman, seemed to fill the little room, to flutter round it as a bird, to hover over it as a spirit. "Can one go on loving for several years in succession?" "Yes," said some. "No," asserted others. They recognized distinctions of degree, set down limits and brought forward examples. And all of them, men and women, filled with recollections which rose up within them and disturbed their souls, which came to their lips and which they could not quote, spoke of that something, commonplace and all-powerful, the tender and mysterious agreement between two human beings, with profound emotion and devouring interest. Suddenly, someone who was looking out over the sea shouted, "Look! Down there! What is it?" Away out to sea could be seen just above the horizon a great grey mass rising indistinct from the water. The women had got up and were looking uncomprehendingly at that strange thing which they had never seen before. Somebody said, "It is Corsica. It can be seen like this 2 or 3 times a year in certain exceptional atmospherical conditions, when the air is perfectly clear, and it is no longer hidden by those sea mists which always veil the distance." They could just see the mountains, and thought they could distinguish the snow on their tops. They all stood surprised, disturbed, almost frightened by this sudden apparition of an unknown world, this phantom rising from the sea. Perhaps those who, like Columbus, set forth across unexplored oceans, had the same strange visions. Then an old gentleman, who had not yet spoken, said, "I have known on this island, which is now rising before us as if itself to answer the question we have been discussing, and to recall to me a curious memory, an admirable example of constant love, of love which was quite marvellously happy. Let me tell you about it. 5 years ago, I took a trip to Corsica. The wilds of that island are less known to us and farther away from us than America, though we sometimes see it from the coast of France, as we can just now. Picture to yourself a world still in a state of chaos, a confused mass of mountains divided by narrow ravines through which torrents rush. There is not a plain, nothing but immense masses of granite and great stretches of rolling country covered with scrub or chestnut and pine forests. It is a virgin, uncultivated, barren country, though from time to time one comes across a village, perched like a heap of rocks on the top of a mountain. There is no culture, no industry, no art. One never comes across a single piece of carved wood or sculptured stone or anything to remind one of the feeling, be it primitive or refined, of the ancestors of these people for what is charming and beautiful. What indeed impresses one most in that magnificent but rough country is the age-long indifference of the people to that seeking for charm in expression which we know as art. Italy, where every palace, full of masterpieces, is itself a masterpiece, where marble, wood, bronze, iron, metals, and stone all bear witness to man's genius, where the smallest objects scattered about in old houses reveal the heaven-born instinct for charm. Italy is for us the divine country, which we love because there we see the greatness, the power, the unwearying striving and the triumph of the creative intelligence of man. And opposite it, Corsica has remained as barbaric as it was in the beginning. There man lives in his rude house, indifferent to everything that does not concern himself or his family feuds. And there he has existed through all the years, with all the defects and all the good points of half-civilized races, easily moved to anger, malicious, thoughtlessly cruel, yet hospitable, generous, loyal, simple-minded, opening his door to the passer-by and giving his faithful friendship in exchange for the smallest mark of sympathy. For a month I wandered through this magnificent island, with the feeling that I was at the end of the world. No inns, no taverns, no roads. You reach by mule paths those little villages, which seem to be hooked onto the sides of mountains and which look down on winding abysses from which you hear, at night, the everlasting, melancholy, long-drawn-out roar of the mountain torrent. You knock at a door and ask for shelter and food till next morning. You sit down at their poor table and you sleep under their poor roof, and in the morning you shake the hand of your host as he leaves you at the end of the village. Well, one evening, after a 10 hours' tramp, I reached a little lonely house at the bottom of a narrow valley which opened out to the sea a league farther on. The 2 steep slopes of the mountain, covered with brushwood, loose rocks, and big trees, shut in this inexpressibly melancholy valley, as with 2 dark walls. Round the cottage were to be seen a few vines, a small garden, and at a little distance some big chestnut trees, something to live on anyhow, and a fortune in this poor land. The woman who opened the door was old, stern, and exceptionally clean. The man sitting in a rush chair rose to greet me, and then sat down again without saying a word. His companion said, "Excuse him, he is deaf now. He is 82. She spoke perfect French, to my surprise. I asked, "You are not Corsicans?" She replied, "No, we come from the mainland, but we have been here for 50 years. I had a feeling of sorrow and of fear as I thought of those 50 years spent in this dark hole, so remote from man and his towns. An old shepherd came in, and we began to eat the one dish which was our supper, a thick soup of potatoes, bacon, and cabbage. When the little meal was over, I went and sat outside, my heart full of the melancholy of the desolate countryside, with the feeling of distress which travellers sometimes experience when the evening is gloomy and the place is desolate. On those occasions it seems as if all were nearly at an end, one's own existence and the world itself. One sees with a flash the awful misery of life, the loneliness of mankind, the emptiness, and the dark solitude of hearts which lull and deceive themselves with dreams to the very end. The old woman came out to me, and, worried by the curiosity which ever exists in even the most resigned hearts, she asked, "Are you from France?" "Yes, I'm having a holiday here." "You come from Paris, perhaps?" "No, from Nancy." It seemed to me that an extraordinary agitation shook her. How I saw, or rather felt it, I do not know. She repeated slowly, "You come from Nancy?" The man appeared in the doorway, impassive as the deaf always are. She continued, "It doesn't matter. He can't hear." Then, after a few seconds, "You know a good many people in Nancy, then?" "Certainly. Nearly everybody. The Saint-Hélèse family? Yes, very well. They were friends of my father's. What is your name? I told her. She looked at me steadily. Then, in the low voice of one who is calling back the unforgettable past, she went on, Yes, of course. I remember quite well. And the Brisemar? What has become of them? They are all dead. Dear, dear. And the Sirmont? Do you know them? Yes. The last of them is a general. Then, shaking with distress, with some indefinable feeling at once powerful and sacred, with some desire to lay bare her heart, to tell everything, to speak of those things which up till then she had kept securely within her, and of those people whose names so moved her, she said, Yes, Henri de Sirmont. I know him well. He is my brother. I looked up at her, thunderstruck. Then, all of a sudden, a bygone memory came back to me. There had been a great scandal in high circles in Lorraine. Suzanne de Sirmont, a rich and beautiful girl, had been carried off by a non-commissioned officer of a regiment of hussars which her father commanded. He was a good-looking boy, of peasant parentage, but handsome in his blue tunic, this soldier who had run away with his colonel's daughter. No doubt she had seen him, noted him, and loved him as she watched the squadrons go by. But how she had been able to speak to him, how they had been able to meet, to understand each other, how she had been bold enough to make him see that she loved him, that was never known. What followed was neither guessed nor anticipated. One evening, just when his term of service was finished, he disappeared with her. They were hunted, but not found. No news of them was ever to be had, and she was looked upon as dead. And now I found her in this gloomy valley. Then I said in my turn, I remember quite well. You are Mademoiselle Suzanne. She nodded, and tears fell from her eyes. Then, looking towards the old man standing motionless on the threshold of his cottage, she said, That is he. I knew then that she was still loving him, and that she still saw the enticing light of bygone days in his eyes. I asked, Have you at least been happy? She answered in a voice that came straight from her heart, Oh, yes, very happy. He made me very happy. I have never had a single regret. I looked at her, sorrowful, surprised, wonder-struck by the power of love. This rich girl had followed this man, this peasant. Herself had become a peasant. She had fashioned for herself a life like this, devoid of grace, of luxury, of any kind of daintiness, and she had trained herself to become accustomed to his simple habits, and she still loved him. With her peasant's bonnet and cloth petticoat she had become a peasant herself. Seated on a rush-bottomed chair at a plain wooden table, she ate out of an earthenware dish a stew made of cabbages and potatoes and bacon. She slept on a straw mattress at his side. She had never thought of anything but him. She had never regretted her jewels, her fine clothes, the softness of chairs, the scent of warm rooms with their tapestries, or the delicious comfort of a feather bed. She had never needed anything but him. As long as he was there, she desired nothing else. Quite young, she had given up life, society, and those who had brought her up and loved her. She had come alone with him to this wild valley, He had been everything to her, everything that one desires, everything that one dreams of, everything that one is always waiting for, always hoping for. From beginning to end he had filled her life with happiness. She could not have been happier. All night, as I listened to the hoarse breathing of the old soldier on his pallet beside her who had followed him so far, I thought of this strange and simple adventure, of this happiness, which was so complete, yet made up of so little. At daybreak I left the house, after shaking the hands of the old couple. The storyteller finished. One of the women said, "All the same, that woman had too simple an ideal, with her two primitive needs and her little wants. She must have been a fool." Another said quietly, "What does it matter? She was happy." Away on the horizon, Corsica buried itself in the darkness, disappearing slowly in the sea, from which it had risen as if itself to tell the story of the two humble lovers whom its shores had sheltered.